welcome to this being live streamed. Welcome to our early June men's group meeting. Announcements. So we are having another one of these men's group Zoom meetings 3 weeks from tonight, and that'll be June 23rd. And that'll be, speaker will be Gon Getz, who is his title is Chief Program Officer of the JCC. He's a young Israeli man doing programming at the JCC, but he's gonna be talking to us about Israeli politics. And he said he could talk about all kinds of stuff, and he mentioned some things, and he mentioned Israeli politics. And I said, well, Israeli politics is so crazy right now. It'd be nice to hear some more about it and get some insights from an insider. So that's his topic. The topic is Israeli politics, understanding Israel's political system and what led it to hold 4 elections in less than 2 years, 3 of which in 6 months. So if you want to hear all about Israeli politics, be here or be there in front of your computer in 3 weeks. And even Jill will be able to make it, right? Okay. And then historically, we've taken the summer off for men's group meetings and probably do that this summer too, and then come back in August or September, and hopefully in person or maybe mixed, but that kind of depends on what happens with COVID and so on in the temple policy. But we'll keep everyone informed. And we already have one speaker lined up, and that's Andy Abramovich, who's an FBI agent. He spoke a couple years ago, and he has an interesting talk. He wants to put together about various cases he's worked on, and his talks have been interesting. And again, that kind of depends on when we're back up and running. He can't do it via Zoom because of FBI security issues and so on. So that's why he's going to be the first, probably the first speaker in the fall. All right, tonight we have Dr. Hannah Cotson. Hannah has been, for 10 years, the last 10 years or so, she was director of the Jewish Buffalo Archives Project. She's basically the Buffalo's Jewish community's historian. She worked in the archives and published a book called The Jewish Community of Greater Buffalo. Came out a few years ago. And now she's just launched the jewishbuffalohistory.org website. And Hannah, you'll probably tell us more about that, I hope. And as a digital historian, she is researching and writing for that website. And you should take a look at it. It's really a lot on it. We'll be seeing some of it tonight. Hannah is also our neighbor. She lives around the corner from here and a good friend. And welcome, Hannah.
Thank you. I'm just going to share screen, and then you're all going to, give me a wave and tell me that it's working, hopefully. I'm hoping that you're now seeing the beginning of my slides.
We are.
Looks good.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. Yes, so thank you very much, Dan. Yes, indeed, I am now working for the Jewish Federation, which is powering the Jewish Buffalo History Center, which is just a digital expression currently, but looking forward to the future when maybe we can meet in person. But the Jewish Buffalo History Center is a evolving resource that is trying to cover much of the key parts of Jewish living in Greater Buffalo, really over the last 170 years. I have many sections up already, particularly institutional history, and of course, 3 of those linked to today's talk. There's another section that details individuals and biographies, and again, one of the individuals featured in there, Milton Milstein, also relates to today's talk. But the Jewish Buffalo History Center is a collaborative project. It's a community engagement project, and it very much looks to tell community history, not just from a historian's perspective or an archivist's perspective or even a curator's perspective, because in some senses that is what I do currently now. I curate resources and mount them together on the website. But it's also something that we want very much to include community involvement, and I'm very grateful for all the people who have contributed materials to the website already and have been willing to share their materials, and I'm very grateful for that. And I should really thank some people who are here today, and that would be Marwin Feldman, who put together the Temple Beth Am scrapbooks, Marty Wolpin, who has done incredible photographs for Temple Sinai. Of course, David Bunis has given materials relating to his family, the Bunises, who are very involved in the Temple Sinai, and there's many more people who I hope to mention as I go through the presentation. But this is our opening website page, and I will stop sharing for a moment and actually now go to the website, share again, and actually go to the live website so that you can actually see how to go about choosing. Are you now seeing institutions and synagogues?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, okay, we are in the right place. So Joanne has very kindly made this very, very simple to you, in that on the Shir Shalom website under archives, you can literally go to these direct links very easily from that page for the 3 congregations. But just in case you want to discover other things, I did want to just quickly show you how you can do it. So the main page you saw, then you click down to institutions, and then choose from institutions synagogues. And once you're in synagogues, you can then scroll downwards and choose the relevant institution you want to visit. Now, some of those institutions are already hyperlinked in this summary overview. For example, you'll see Temple Sinai and Temple Beth Am and Congregation Shir Shalom are already hyperlinked. So if you click on those, you will go immediately to the pages. But if you want to scroll down and just look at what else you can also look at, this is your opportunity to do that. I will go to those things in a minute, but first of all, I wanted to just show you the overview map of synagogues. I think this is bearing in mind that we're about to talk about suburban synagogues and the movement from the city into the suburbs. This is a great map that really shows how many of the congregations moved from the city out to the suburb over time. And if you click on each of these pins, you can again be directed to the individual synagogues featured. And I just wanted to comment that in addition to various people being acknowledged throughout the presentation, there is this great acknowledgement key at the bottom of the website that lists all of the people that have been very helpful in putting this together. And I will say that, this has been a project that has been in the making for many years, in the sense of, as Daniel mentioned, the Jewish Buffalo Archives Project. And so some of the collections, some of the individuals I mentioned are sadly no longer with us, but their collections are at the University at Buffalo. And when that reopens again, I very much hope that you will be able to go and see this material in person. But the next best thing, of course, is to see it in a presentation, hopefully, or the website. So back to the presentation. Is it back on the presentation now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I mentioned those links. As I mentioned, there are 3 direct links to the individual congregations. Then there's a suburban link and Milton Milstein link, and the direct Shir Shalom link. I'll make this PowerPoint available so you can put it on your website, and then you'll have access to that too. But as I say, Joanne's made it very easy. So today I'm just going to be talking about really the very first foundational years of the 2 forerunner congregations. And I really want to show the beginnings of congregations, because I think it sets a tone for the individual flavors of the synagogues themselves, and how they met, how eventually, without perhaps foreseeing this, how they might have meshed together to become one unified congregation in the future. And of course, this photograph, these are Marty Wolpen photographs, this one in particular on the left. This, of course, is the walk from Temple Sinai, from the former Temple Sinai to the former Temple Beth Am. You can see that it's a historic photograph. It's still, Temple Beth Am is still written on the board here. And this is literally July 1st, 2012, when the 2 congregations came together and became Congregation Shir Shalom. So that's our setting. And now I'm going to talk really about the 2 founder congregations. So of course, Congregation Shir Shalom and the former congregations come out of a broad movement to the suburbs. Although suburban moves were actually as early as the late 20s. For example, some institutions were already in the suburbs, Jewish suburbs. Some Jewish organizations were already in the suburbs by then. For example, the forerunner to the Westwood Country Club, which is of course no longer, that was initially founded as the Willowdale Country Club. But and there were a few families that were moving out in the 30s and 40s, but we really think of the movement into the suburbs as a 1950s phenomenon. Although, as I say, many individuals were moving out, particularly in the 40s, 30s and 40s. So Temple Sinai and Temple Beth Am, formerly known as the suburban congregation, really are part of the suburban move from the city into the suburbs that not just Jews were part of and spearheading from a community point of view, an early congregation point of view, but this was very much a movement of aspiring middle class, younger members of the community and individuals who wanted, and families who wanted to have a life in the suburbs. And when we talk about the beginnings of Temple Sinai and Temple Temple Beth Am, suburban congregation as it was, it's really important to sort of remember what wasn't also in the suburbs at that time, i.e. Temple Beth Zion's suburban branch was not in the suburbs at that point. In fact, we'll see that was really a spur for the suburban congregations' decision to split away, some of the members to split away from Temple Beth Zion. And the Jewish Community Center was not, the Getzville Jewish Community Center was not in the suburbs. So when the congregations went out into the suburbs, the two founder congregations, they were really, with the exception of the Willowdale and the West, and then the Westwood Country Club, they were really setting the Jewish community of Greater Buffalo as a Jewish community of Greater Buffalo. They were really setting the scene for that transfer. Some of the reasons for the founding of the two synagogues came out of dissatisfaction of what was already present. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. And the other reasons were wholly separate from that. There were real desires on both sets of members of the two congregations to found something new, to found something different, to found something that actually spoke to their own desires for Jewish congregational life. And of course, another important factor was the rise of Reconstructionism, which we'll follow partly when I talk about Temple Sinai, and of course the Jewish demographics. At this time, the Jewish population of Greater Buffalo was expanding, and there was a concurrent desire of obviously to also spread into the suburbs. So at the beginning of the 50s, Jewish Jewish numbers were about 22,000. There would be a height of 26,000, but it's a substantive community size then, about double what it is today. And then of course I'm going to talk about Temple Sinai, Temple Beth Am, and mention that Congregation Shir Shalom is almost in its 10th year. And that's a great time to be thinking about how you're going to record your own future history. And I will say that Temple Sinai and Temple Beth Am were always thinking about their historical moment, their historical decisions. And you'll see that as we go through. Temple Sinai and Temple Beth Am were always first in to really capture their own histories, and I think that is a great impetus for Congregation Shir Shalom, a very unique congregation, the world's first jointly contrived Reform and Reconstructionist congregation within its articles of incorporation, and so I think it's a really critical forward planning thing to be investing time in as you go into your 10th year. So I'm just going to start with the very beginnings of Temple Sinai. Temple Sinai really, although it was founded in 1952, and this is a 1953 photograph. It really came out of individuals. I already mentioned the Bunises, Lewis and his wife Anne, who it really came out of individuals who were thinking about conservative Judaism within Greater Buffalo. And it really came out of sort of thoughts about how some aspects of conservative Judaism might be changed. And one of the impetuses for this was a 1942 lecture that was given by Ira Eisenstein, who was the son-in-law of Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. He came to Buffalo in the 1940s, and Louis Bunis attended this lecture. And from then, he really dived into reading Rabbi Kaplan's work and trying to reform within Temple Emmanuel, which is where he had been associated. As I say, in the early years, it was really an attempt, even prior to Temple Sinai, to actually change conservative Judaism as it was practiced in Buffalo, to maybe introduce different emphases within conservative Judaism. After 10 years, then a small nascent group came together and actually formally decided that they wished to separate and form their own congregation. One one of the first places that they congregated was actually the Jewish center in, of course, there was only one Jewish center at that time on Delaware Avenue. And that was where the first high holidays were held. But after that, they looked around and purchased this building, a former church. And this became the first home of Temple Sinai in the town of Tonawanda. Just to give you a sense, you can already see from the outside that it was a fairly small building, but this really gives you a sense of the size inside. And it also illustrates actually how quickly the congregation grew. We have Louis Bunis here on the, well, it's on my right. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but he's standing with the tallis next to the rabbi in the middle. This was a rabbi who, a hired rabbi for one of the first high holidays. And Harry Hart Kaufman is standing at the back he was the cantor at Temple L at the time, and the links with conservative Judaism did continue for a long time, this continued, as you can see, in even with the separation from Temple Emmanuel in 1954. When Rabbi Nathan Gaynor was installed as the rabbi, one of the key speakers, along with, of course, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, was Rabbi Isaac Klein. This is inside Lindale, and you'll notice, I don't know if you saw in the previous photograph, there was actually no, there was no decoration. There was nothing on there were no tablets on the bima, but it's been within a year it was remodeled, and this features was added. I'm just trying to move my screen a bit so I can move this on faster. By 1956, you saw from the inside of the building, the congregation was growing rapidly, and the church, the former church, Lindale Avenue Temple, was really bursting at the seams. And so ground was purchased on Alberta Drive, and the groundbreaking was held. One of the interesting parts of the founding of Temple Sinai was actually the links that they retained with the former church, Trinity Methodist, and the former and their conservative Judaism links, and indeed, so that when the groundbreaking came about, the sort of worthies that were present were both Christian and Jewish. And Milton Milstein was hired as the architect. He, of course, had designed the building in which Temple Sinai had held its first high holiday services, the Jewish Community Center on Delaware Avenue. I think this photograph is really really instructive about Temple Sinai. Yes, I've really stressed the point that we're in the suburbs, but we're really in a suburban tract, surrounded by homes. It's not on a huge avenue, you know, that's lined with other shops or other huge buildings, you know, perhaps as predecessor congregations that you can think of in the city. This really is a suburban congregation, and this is the building going up on Alberta Drive, and this was taken by Mr. Frey, who took a lot of the early photographs. This, of course, is inside Temple Sinai. And the feature that I wanted to point out here is that the way in which the temple sanctuary was designed, very much a style that was also carried through with Temple Beth Am's congregation sanctuary. And that is, you can see the division between the sanctuary and the opening up of the social hall in the back here. You can see the changes in floor style. But I had mentioned that Temple Sinai was groundbreaking in that it was the first congregation in the suburbs. It was also the first congregation to have a female president, and Edith Goldstein became the first female president of Temple Sinai in 1961. This is you get a sense of the outside design of Temple Sinai from this photograph, and you can definitely see some sort of parallels with the Jewish Community Center, some of the design features. But one of the things I want to mention with this slide is that at this point, there is no Reconstructionist training school. It's 1964. There's so if you want to hire a rabbi, if you want to hire a Reconstructionist rabbi, technically you're hiring a conservative rabbi, conservative Judaism rabbi, or perhaps later on you're going to hire somebody trained outside of that, outside of conservative Judaism. And one of the reasons why we're now onto the photograph with one of the last periods of Rabbi Gainor's rabbinate. One of the reasons why we'll see in a minute that Rabbi Herzog was hired was in 1965. Rabbi Gaynor left the congregation. One of the problems that Temple Sinai experienced in the 1960s was that it could not affiliate with the conservative Judaism movement because it held its school, its religious school, on Shabbat. It had Saturday sessions. And as it had Saturday sessions, students wrote on. And this was one of the reasons why it could not be accepted. There was a decision made by the conservative movement not to accept Temple Sinai into the conservative movement, which meant that when Rabbi Nathan Gaynor left for a new post at Hillel, he became a Hillel rabbi. Temple Sinai was faced with a decision about who could they hire next. And although Reconstructionism was growing, and there were many conservative rabbis who were very much interested in Reconstructionism, as far as hiring a rabbi, it wasn't possible to go to a rabbinic it wasn't possible to go through a rabbinic placement center at that point. So in 1968, when Rabbi Herzog was installed as the new rabbi, he was affiliated with the Reform movement. And yet the ties with conservative Judaism continued. And again, this is his installation, and Rabbi Isaac Klein is present here again. And the debate, the years between 65 and 68 were really interesting years when Temple Sinai was really debating how it would go about defining itself as both founded and committed to Reconstructionism, but also have a rabbi who was trained within the Reform movement. Rabbi Herzog was very committed to Reconstruction as well, and so that was a good match. If you are ever able to go to the University at Buffalo once they do open up their archives again, there are papers at the University of Buffalo that have long discussions about very passionate discussions about how to define Temple Sinai and how to retain its Reconstructionist ethos and identity, even as it affiliated dually with Reform Judaism. And I wanted to just end this short introduction because I've only got an hour, so I can only do so much justice to Temple Sinai before I move on to Temple Beth Am. And this is a suburban congregation. I just wanted to again reiterate the maintenance of ties, and yet ties that had really sort of separated, because by the time, of course, Rabbi Kaplan celebrates his 90th birthday, and that event is actually held at Temple Beth Zion in the city in 1971. Of course, there was by then a Reconstructionist movement that could also that was also in the throes of being able to train rabbis. Now, I want to just quickly move on to Temple Beth Am. Of course, Temple Beth Am was founded initially as a suburban congregation. And it was partly a split, as I mentioned before, with Temple Beth Zion in the early 1950s. This is before Temple Beth Zion's building at 599 Delaware Avenue had burned. We're talking the 1950s, and there were many younger congregants who really wanted to have a school in the suburbs, and there was a real sort of division between parts of Temple Beth Zion, in that there were older members who had their work and their homes in the city. Many of them were much older. Their children were also based at schools in the city. And then there was a younger cohort who very much wanted, who were settled in the suburbs and wanted to have a congregational school that would meet in the suburbs. And there was also this division between, as I'm also hinting at, there's also sort of an age and really sort of a generational difference. So initially, a group of Temple Beth Zion members approached Temple Beth Zion, the Temple Beth Zion board, and really stressed the need to found a congregational school in the suburbs. And there was a lot of debate about whether this was really necessary. Some of the older members and the board were torn as to whether or not this was a necessary need. Eventually, this group of young Temple Beth Zionists decided that they could really no longer wait for the discussions about whether or not a suburban school would be founded, and they split from Temple Beth Zion. But I should also mention that as I mentioned, these individuals were based in the suburbs, and there were many other young Jews who were moving into the suburbs who were completely unaffiliated with any congregation and were from beyond Buffalo, had moved to the suburbs and to Greater Buffalo because of the work opportunities. There were growing engineering opportunities. Buffalo was still, expanding at that point. The suburbs were growing, and so there was a whole cohort of Temple, what would later become Temple Beth Am members, who had no affiliation with Temple Beth Zion and no commitment to the 599. They did not have memories of the Delaware Avenue, sanctuary. There was no commitment to that there was no connection rather to that history. And so the nascent group of individuals who founded the suburban congregation were a mixture of both ex-Temple Beth Zioners and unaffiliated members in the suburbs. And the reason why I stress that so much is because it's interesting to note that in 1954, 55, there's this real desire to found this new group, but there is petitioning by Temple Beth Zion for these former Temple Beth Zion younger members to still come back to Temple Beth Zion. So there's all this back and forth. But as I mentioned, eventually this group declares itself as its own congregation, the suburban congregation, and meets in people's homes, and then has this very long-lasting relationship with the Amherst Community Church and the Reverend Olin Tracy. So this is one of the founding groups. If you go to the website, the Jewish Buffalo History Center website, and the Temple Beth Am entry, you'll see a list of all of the founder members. But I just did want to point out one person in this picture. Evelyn Singer is in this picture, and she actually, if you go into the open space down the corridor within Shir Shalom, you'll see a wonderful framed item on the wall, and it has all the first members of the suburban congregation, their name tags, and she created these and kept them and then framed them, and I reproduced the list on the website, on the Jewish Buffalo History Center website. But as I say, in 1954-55, the Suburban City Steering Congregation formally commits to founding a new congregation, and they have Rabbi Albert Baum come to one of their in-home meetings to set about founding the new congregation. And here I want to thank Marwin Feldman for all the photographs that I'm basically using from the scrapbook that he compiled. He compiled a whole series of scrapbooks, and they're absolutely essential for resource for Beth Am history. I mentioned that that Temple Beth Am was the suburban congregation was meeting in multiple people's homes, and in different sites, the Park School. It was also meeting at one stage. It met in a fire hall, and in order to do that, this portable ark was created by members, and then it was actually taken into its new home at Amherst. It was Amherst Community Church, partnered with the suburban congregation. And if you look at this photograph, you'll see the portable ark, but you'll see a backdrop behind it, which you can then see here again. This backdrop that you're seeing behind the portable ark, underneath that, there are photographs in those scrapbooks, and it does show the cross. So each Shabbat, the church would actually cover the cross to enable the suburban congregation to conduct Sabbath services, Shabbat services. In 1955, the suburban congregation hired their first rabbi, Rabbi Milton Richman, and in 1955, the first bar mitzvah was held. And I mentioned Evelyn Singer a moment ago, and this is of course her son, Stuart Singer. And Daniel was kind enough to mention the book, the Arcadia book that I mentioned, that I created a few years ago. And this is actually featured in that book. And one of the reasons why I wanted to feature this particular photograph is because of the transformation from bar mitzvahs that were very much in the book. You'll see this, the bar mitzvah that were held, by traditional congregations, were very much adult-centered celebrations. But this 1955 celebration, you're already seeing the change in emphasis on adult-centered to child-centered ritual and celebration within life cycle events. I'm just gonna. I mentioned earlier that both Temple Sinai and Temple Beth Am, then still, of course, at this point, suburban congregation, were very conscious of their historical roots, their founding, the fact that they were the firsts in their field, and into the suburbs. Of course, suburban reform was the first reform congregation in the suburbs. That was after 100 years of dominance by Temple Beth Zion as the only reform congregation in Greater Buffalo, quite different from conservative Judaism, which had multiple conservative congregations. And when Temple Sinai was founded, it was really just another. It was initially associated with conservative Judaism, although practicing with a Reconstructionist philosophy. So here is this 1956 photograph of a play that was performed. And the one thing we don't have is the actual text of the play. And so if anybody does have the text of the play, I think it would be really wonderful to see what skits that they were performing. But this really is a satire of a musical satire of the founding of the congregation. An ark is not a boat. And this is the congregation here. And again, they're still actually within the church at this point. In 1958, the ground is broken, and by 1959, on the current site of Shir Shalom, the cornerstone ceremony is held. And I had mentioned to you earlier about Reverend Olin Tracy. He was part of the who was the pastor at the Amherst Community Church. He was part of the ceremony. He spoke at the ceremony, and in actual fact, in the cornerstone, there were documents that recalled the association of the church and the synagogue in their founding. And some of those documents are actually, again, in the room just down the corridor at Congregation Shir Shalom. You can actually see those documents. They are very fragile at this point. They were recovered from the cornerstone. And this is the building going up. This building was designed by George Pearl. I'm just blanking for a moment.
Gerald Perlman.
Perlman, yes, I was saying Perlstein because I'm doing my Milton. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I stumbled on that. Thank you. But and it's unusual architecture. I showed in the earlier photographs. By the time the building is being erected, of course, the suburban congregation has changed its name. It's no longer Suburban Congregation of Reformed Judaism. It's actually now Temple Beth Am. And one of the impetus for that was Rabbi Kerman. Rabbi Kerman joined as rabbi in 1958. At his installation, his father, who was a rabbi at Chesed Abraham in Jamestown, New York, was part of the ceremony. And Rabbi Kerman suggested the name for the new congregation. And I think it's interesting that as the temple is building its own sanctuary, its more formal sanctuary, it then redefines itself not just by place, but by intent, by how it perceives of itself. Temple Beth Am, House of the People, I think is a very instructive name, just as your later name could equally be considered, instructive of your definition of yourself going forward as a combined congregation. But this painting is, of course, in the Congregation Shir Shalom hallway. And although I cannot talk about Rabbi Kerman's years at this point, because I'm coming up on the hour, and I do want to have some opportunity to hear about your own memories of either congregation's early years, and maybe corrections, maybe not, hopefully not too many corrections, but I really would love to hear, all of your perspectives. Perhaps into the future, we can talk about the evolution of the two congregations in their later years. But I did want to talk about just one final part of the Temple Beth Am story. As I mentioned, Rabbi Kerman suggests this new change of name, and that is formalized in 1959. And in 1960, and I discovered this whilst going through some of the materials at the Kofel Judaic Museum, I found this cup, this plaque in appreciation to Temple Beth Zion. So I had mentioned that Temple Beth Zion for many years hoped that some of the members would come back to Temple Beth Zion as members rather than split and form the suburban congregation. There was actually there was almost a reverse. In 1956, there was this discussion about whether or not there should be a vote, and there was a vote. 3-1, members of the suburban congregation decided not to merge with Temple Beth Zion. But after 3 years at the Amherst Community Church, and once Temple Beth Zion had built its suburban school, finally, the school that Temple suburban congregation members had so much wanted, suburban congregation actually rented from Temple Beth Am in the suburbs and was its major tenant, except for its own school for the year and a half before Temple Beth Am had its own purpose-built building. And by then, Temple Beth Am had grown significantly, and I think this gives a sense of the size of the congregation by the beginning of the 70s when this confirmation photograph was taken. So I did want to thank you for listening, and I hope that I can answer questions that you have and really get ideas for other areas that I can concentrate on collecting materials for, and get a sense of how you might want to go forward with your 10th anniversary, because that is coming up within the next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. If people have questions or comments, just go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask them.
I have a couple of comments that I would like to offer.
Yes.
Having had the privilege of living through the birth of Temple Sinai
Yes.
with, as a teenager or less,
Yes.
I just wanted to share my memory that one of the prime motivations for leaving Temple Emmanuel, where my dad and his other co-founders were, was because of their dissatisfaction with the present rabbi at the time. And it's interesting to me to see pictures of Isaac Klein throughout your presentation as being a part of the formation and, making speeches too, and being a part of things at the same time as the founders couldn't wait to get away from him. That's my memory of it in any case.
I mean, it's very interesting that, yes, I mean, Rabbi Klein had very firm, attitudes about the split away. He really felt that Temple Sinai was not founding another conservative congregation of a liberal leaning, because that was how it initially defined itself. It was founding a new movement, and he was quite vocal about that. And yet, it is interesting how I have to actually thank the Slonims for scanning all these photographs. It was intriguing, how much. How many photographs the Kleins did feature in, and how they were present at milestones that, in effect, said goodbye to the conservative movement as practiced by Rabbi Klein. So I found that, and I think that's what's so interesting about the founding and separating of congregations and the uniting of congregations is the links that are retained, and despite differences. And Sinai, as you say, it definitely went on to define itself, as its own institution, separate from the conservative Judaism that Rabbi Klein was a very staunch proponent of conservadoxy, really.
I think at that time, it just came into my memory, Rabbi Klein was given a lifetime contract.
Yes.
And that, I think, was the straw.
Yes, he did get he very quickly, within just a few years of arriving in Buffalo, he very quickly was awarded that. He of course, was on the, he headed the law of the Committee on Conservative Law Standards and Status. He was very much involved in the movement, the conservative Judaism movement, at a high level, it's very interesting to see that link.
And the other parallel that I would just mention, unrelated to Sinai, I see that early Beth Am, or whatever it was called, met at Park School.
Yep. It's interesting.
And guess what's happening, in current times?
Yeah.
Kadima School is at Park School.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's fascinating, the arcs. Sometimes the arcs are circles. There are arcs of change and there are arcs of circles. Yeah, it is very interesting, the swings.
And I thank you for this wonderful presentation, Chana. It was terrific.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, if I can sneak in before we're done.
Oh, yes. Please.
I'm not a Buffalo native. I only came up here in '77, so maybe this is obvious, but you kept saying suburbs, the suburbs, but it was obviously just Amherst. Why not the South towns? Why not Lancaster? Why the migration just to Amherst?
Well, Amherst and Williamsville and then Clarence, and really the town of Tonawanda. Well, it's the Northwood. It was the Northwood movement. It was really spreading out from. If you think about the early, you came in 1977. Where did you settle in 1977? I'm just intrigued.
The UB Amherst campus.
The Amherst campus,
and then Amherst, Amherst.
Yes. So you came in 77, which is also very interesting when we think about the second JCC, the suburban JCC. And your question was why I'm really just focusing on Amherst and why wasn't it the South Towns? And well, there were actually small congregations that were that founded small sort of little congregations, but they were much later. I'm thinking of a congregation that was based out in Elmer, that had started also in I still to write up about this.
Let me jump in just for a moment. Obviously, you were talking to Sinai and Beth Am, which went to Amherst. I guess my question was directed more towards the map that only showed congregations in Buffalo and Amherst. I didn't see any anywhere else.
Right, because that map is a congregational map of what I have on the website currently. And when I detail some others, but to be perfectly frank, apart from the Elmer-based Beth Shalom, it really has been it doesn't mean to say that Jews have only lived in Amherst, in the city, and the areas that that we're really focusing on, Kenmore, Tonawanda, Amherst, Williamsville, Clarence, but that has been the central focus. And it's very interesting that you came in that you said you came as part of the UB suburban branch of UB, not South Campus, but you mentioned North Campus, and the JCC came incredibly late to the suburbs. There were many attempts to get it in the suburbs, but nobody was certain where. In the early 60s, there's this UB goes state. It becomes it's no longer the University of Buffalo. It becomes a state university, and then there's this long, tortuous debate about whether it will expand in the city, and the Jewish community, and in particular the leaders of the Jewish Community Center very much want to have another, to either move completely to the suburbs, unbelievably, or to found another branch of the Jewish Community Center, but they just don't know where to put it, because, like you say, you have Temple Sinai, it's on Alberta Drive, and then you have Temple Beth Am, which is almost in a field in Williamsville. Where are you going to put this new this second branch of the JCC? And they did actually buy land very near Sweet Home, which they then sold, because once finally the decision about the UB campus was made, and the community leaders within the Jewish Community Center and within the Jewish Federation really thought that the university would be a draw to many Jewish professors, and they were right. There were many Jews who came to UB to work within UB and in allied organizations that sort of related to UB. There was a growth of engineering generally, and some of them had connections with the UB. And so once finally UB makes its decision that it's going to be in it is going to have a campus in North Buffalo, and it is going to locate near North Forest, that's finally when actually the Jewish Community Center then decides to build there, and that's in the 1970s. So it's surprising how late it gets there. In between times, the Jewish Community Center has many what's called extension centers, and some of those are using existing spaces. For example, Temple Beth Zion's Sweet Home campus was an extension of the Jewish Community Center for some of the time as well as many other places that were rented. But yes, it really was, to answer your question, for the most part, Jewish, I would say, residential pattern settlement really was North Buffalo, north and into the suburb, into Amherst, rather than the South towns, which were considered more, dominantly Catholic, more, more homogenous, and whereas perhaps North Buffalo, it was dominantly Presbyterian or Protestant, and there were multiple different churches. There was less, obviously there was Catholic churches as well, but perhaps there was a sense that there were multiple different small individual congregations that were being founded in Amherst, Williamsville area, and so it would just be little congregations that weren't necessarily part of mass movements, and anybody could really settle within the suburbs.
Yeah. I would also mention that Congregation Havurah was founded in 1971,
Yep.
Having left TBZ for some of the same reasons that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Also, and this doesn't really relate to the temples, but to the migration of Jewish Buffalo. I've been in Buffalo for 37 years, but when I was in high school in the Catskill Mid-Hudson region, I went to different youth leadership conferences and stuff, and I met a girl from Amherst, New York, at a time when I had no idea where that was. And she told me she hated Jews, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, there's so many Jews moving in all around me and taking over my school." And
Really?
that was the late 70s, and that was when the migration was happening, that a lot of Jews were winding up in the suburbs.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
Anyone else? I noticed you had you showed a newspaper. It was the predecessor to the Suburban from 1956. One of the columns was Men's Club to Pick Officers. I think that's when I was elected to this position, I remember. Anyways, anyone else have any questions? One question I have, is it correct that the only Reformed congregations in Buffalo have been the two, Bethel and TBZ?
Well, it depends if you think Greater Buffalo. So there was an unaffiliated Beth Shalom, which was in Olean. It actually was in Camp Centerland. Then there was a Jewish group, both of which, certainly Beth Shalom, not B'nai Shalom, but Beth Shalom, was associated with, it was unaffiliated at first, but it definitely had later Reform Judaism links. So I would say, and you could argue that Havurah, 1971 Havurah it's Congregation Havara, but it's licensed. It was you know, if you look at its certificate, it's through it's through the Reform movement. So I wouldn't say that it's the only in. It could be the only in Williamsville, but not necessarily in Greater Buffalo, because affiliation. You see, affiliation bought. I mean, even Temple Sinai had Reform trained rabbis, and then dual. And then Reconstructionist trained rabbis, and then of course dual Reconstructionist Reform trained rabbis. So eventually, obviously, much later, but even Temple Sinai was paying dues to both the Reconstructionist, you know, the fellowship before it became a formal movement. It was also paying dues to the movement, mainly because it received placement of its rabbis through their service. So when you talk about affiliation, but Temple Sinai did not conceive of itself necessarily as a Reform congregation. So it's hard to sort of give a succinct and straight answer on that, because it depends why you affiliate with a movement. Sometimes you affiliate for services or for support, because you know, once you're with a movement, a very established movement, whereas Reconstructionism, you know, was a much smaller movement with much smaller you know, coffers, you know, to help its congregants, congregations that affiliated with it. It's just a significantly smaller arm of you know, the streams of Judaism. So you know, I hope that I'm not prevaricating, but giving you some sense of, yes, there were others.
And Temple Sinai came out of the conservative movement. Was that typical for Reconstructionist congregations?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it was, because they
Yeah,
were, because
Rabbi Kaplan was
Rabbi Kaplan.
I mean, conservative.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't, you know, apparently he you know, his works were used as the basis of an eventual separate stream. But originally it was the goal of Reconstructionism was to reconstruct conservative Judaism. It wasn't necessarily to found a separate stream.
Canilla's you muted.
I wanted to ask, you have mentioned many rabbis I don't know, and in the history of our temples, but I felt that Cantor Susan Whaley came from Sinai
Yes.
to Temple Beth Am, and maybe even our new name was in her honor, and she was not mentioned tonight, so I just wanted to ask about that, because I have felt, and I have said that many times, that this so-called merger was not always such a peaceful and happy event.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do a follow-up when I move beyond the 1970s. And yes, I'm going to definitely be talking about individuals who had, in some senses, were both. I mean, that is a connection. It's certainly, if you go to the Jewish Buffalo History Center website, on both pages, Temple Beth Am and, well, Temple Sinai first, but Temple Beth Am, I do talk about Cantor Whaley, of course, and I definitely, in a follow-up, would be talking about her and other shared clergy.
Hannah, do you know that Susan Whaley really started with Havara?
Ah, right.
And she and Danny got married at Havara.
Oh.
And then she moved on.
And then she moved to, oh, okay. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, so let's say again, thank you, Hannah. Very interesting.
Thank you, Hannah. It was wonderful.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do and work together with Congregation Shir Shalom's 10th anniversary, because that's huge. We've just had a difficult year. It's something to look forward to. Year and a half or so. It's something really to look forward to and to plan. I can help in I can help in any way with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Donna. I just wanted to say I think it's important to honor the history. So I very much appreciated the way you pulled it all together. Thank you very much, because it is it's part of all of our heritage, and thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hannah, before you go, read all the chat comments. You have lots of complimentary comments there.
I should save the chat, shouldn't I? There you go. And then I can reply to people. Because yes, I'm sorry, when you're in presentation mode, you can't actually read I haven't worked out how to read the chat as well. So I apologize if people have asked me things in there. I should probably look. I mean, if anybody asked me something actually I haven't answered, please give me a shout now. I'm desperately reading through. No, I think there aren't too many questions, so that's great. That aren't already answered. So thank you. And do dive into the website, because there's a ton of information about. If you go under the suburb section, then you can see a much wider range of information. Although that section is going to be developed, the neighborhood sections are going to be far more developed over time. At this point, we're really looking for more photographs and images. I'd really like to show, and I did talk to Mr. Perlman about the early sketches of Temple Beth Am's building and the sanctuary, and so I'm hoping to be able to feature that. But yeah, please do feel free to contact me. Through the website, there's multiple ways to contact me through the website, and if you want to share any images you have of your own time with either congregation and this congregation, please do. And actually former images of suburban, or other parts of Jewish Buffalo. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks, Dan.
See you in a few weeks, hopefully. Good night.